My mother's an eccentric paranoid. There's no other way to describe her. She has the oddest beliefs and rules ever. When I was young, I didn't question them. But as I got older, I wanted to know more. Why the rules? What were the stories behind them? My mother said there were ghosts in empty vacated rooms and around corners. They don't like surprises, she said. The longer a room has been empty of living energy, the more likely a ghost or demon would have taken up residence. I found out later that was a big fat lie, because the truth was much worse than ghosts, demons and goblins. We weren't allowed to run in the house, which I suppose isn't the oddest of rules, but she would freak out if we ever did. Running around corners was an absolute no-no, whether you were in the house or outside, so we didn't. Well, I didn't. My younger brother, Johnny, was always breaking the rules, and I caught him twice breaking the most important rule of all. The knock thrice, it's only a polite rule, was the most bizarre, and no compromises were given with regards to abiding by it. The rule was simple, really. If a door was shut, we must knock 3 times, then count to 3 before entering, even if we knew for certain the room was empty. In fact, especially if we knew the room was empty. The same with corners or bends. Count to 3 before you turn the corner. So many rules that smothered and dictated our lives. We were never allowed to visit our friends or attend sleepovers or birthday parties. That was sheer chaos, my mother had warned. And chaos led to accidents. She said our time could be better spent studying, and so our heads were almost always buried in a book. My dad wanted to take us to Disneyland. My mother said it was a waste of money and was sure one of us would go missing. She hated crowds, claiming they obscured danger. My dad wanted to take us camping, and my mother, of course, flat out refused. "Do you know how many people go missing in the forests every year?" she had admonished him. He had shaken his head with a big dumb expression on his face, his default expression when he didn't want to deal with my mother's bullshit. "Thousands," she had exclaimed. We did eventually go camping. Don't ask me how he talked her around. My parents bickered all the way to the camping ground and throughout the trail walks. She just wouldn't shut up about the hidden dangers. Then my brother, 14 at the time, went missing. We'd been walking along a particularly beautiful trail with trees on either side, obscuring the sunlight, and it was dark and a little creepy. My brother and I were just slightly ahead of my parents. I could see a bend coming up, and we knew to dutifully stop, wait for our parents to catch up before we would turn the bend, together, synchronized as if one organism. Not this time. Johnny broke formation before he'd had time to form. He just bolted, took off, no warning, nothing, just gone. I watched horrified as he raced on ahead of us, as if the hounds of hell were after him. I half expected him to come to a grinding halt at the bend, but no, he sped up and disappeared around it. I turned back to my parents, a look of abject terror on my face. I remember thinking we would never see him again. My mother started screaming, and my dad raced past me and after him. It was clear, as my mom and I rounded the bend, that Johnny had disappeared. My mother's worst nightmare.
Oh my God!
You can imagine the scene, the hysteria, the tears, the blame game, the search. A park ranger eventually found him a couple of hours later, dozing in the bushes, not far from where he had disappeared. Apparently, he had just lost it. The open space, fresh air, was too much for him, he had told the ranger. An overwhelming urge to run free and get away from my parents' suffocating grip and constant arguing had overcome him. It was kind of funny, and I half wished I'd taken off with him. My mom was too relieved to be angry, but instead she cut our trip short. I asked Johnny on the way home if he had seen any monsters, ghosts or goblins, and he had told me to grow up. There were no such things as monsters or goblins. My brother left home at 18. He really was a free spirit, despite our restrictive upbringing. He was off to explore the world, he told me, every dark corner and shut door. It was as if he was in search of what my mother was afraid of. But deep down, he was still a prisoner of my mother's paranoia. A couple of years later, I followed my brother into the big wide world. Not as far-flung as he, but far enough to revel in my newfound freedom. I moved into my own flat, Not too far from my parents, actually, but it was my flat. My rules now. I would run around, and sometimes, just for the hell of it, I would whip a shut door open as if trying to catch someone in the act. The old family traditions had been firmly left behind. The residual feeling stayed with me, however, deeply embedded in my psyche. So no matter how many doors I kicked open or barged through, there was that fleeting moment of trepidation, that trickle of fear, when I wantedly broke my mother's rules. A feeling deep down that I might one day stumble upon something I couldn't unsee. That day finally arrived, and I guess I knew it would. It was a normal morning like any other, and I had just returned from my early morning jog. I let myself in and kicked off my trainers in my small hallway. I headed for my living room, deep in thought about the day ahead. Was I too fast, too quiet? I have no idea. I have no idea as to what I'd done differently that morning. The cause and effect was beyond me. I remember reaching out, opening the living room door. And then the door is pulled from me by an unseen force on the other side. My mind barely has time to take it in. Wind rushes past and engulfing me, and for a fleeting moment I think of my mother's ghosts. I only manage a gasp of shock, barely audible, before it is whipped away from my lips along with the air in my lungs. I increase my grip on the doorframe as I feel my scarf untangle from my neck, like a snake uncoiling from sleep. I watch mesmerized as it is suspended, red flutters rise, and then it is still, so still. All I can see is it is frozen, as if being inspected by unseen eyes, before being snatched into the void, swallowed up, like it never existed. I feel the perspiration lift from my skin, tiny droplets, suspended in front of my eyes. For what must have been a millisecond, and yet forever, and then they too are whipped away. I was standing on the precipice of oblivion. Where my living room should have been, there was nothing. Have you ever stared into nothing? Do you know what nothing actually is? Everything you believed about your existence comes down to this. You suddenly realize you never knew anything in the first place. I stand there on the edge, and all I could think of at that point was an endless void of nothing. What lay before me was a vacuum, infinite and vast, and yet as minuscule as the eye of an needle. If I had stepped one foot into that void, I would have become part of that swirling pit of empty. If I had raced into that room as I usually did, I would have run into extinction. I felt as if I looked at God and he looked back, and this omnipotent being was not pleased by my presence. Not at all. My fingers were slipping, and I could feel myself losing the battle to remain in my world, and I didn't want to be pulled into this universe. I didn't want to die, and I'm not sure death would even have been my fate. A burst of wind like an unseen hand hits me with such force that I am lifted from my feet and sent flying backwards. My ears pop, and as if that releases me from my stupor, I manage to vocalize what I'd wanted to do from the moment I opened the door. I managed to scream of shock, fear, then pain as I hit the wall behind me. The door is slammed shut. Dazed and confused, I slide to the floor. I don't know how long I lay there in a crumpled heap, my eyes tightly shut, afraid to open them, not sure that I wanted to. Then the cogs began to turn as my back began to ache from where I'd hit the wall. I opened my eyes slowly and stared at the door to nowhere. I thought of my mother and her family rules, the supernatural, natural, preternatural, every theory I had grasped in physics class. Just a confused jumble of information, none making any sense. When my wits finally returned, still shaken, I went back to my parents', my old room, and the comfort of my mother's rules, unsure if my flat was a portal to hell. I mulled over the rules and searched for their meaning. I didn't tell my parents. I called my brother to talk about it, but I found I couldn't find the right words. After a few days, I returned to my flat. I circled the building, poking at the brickwork, and then eventually I shielded my eyes and peered through the living room window. Everything seemed normal. I banged on my front door, ignoring my neighbour's startled look from across the hedge he was trimming. I cautiously turned the key and let myself in. I stood in the hallway listening for the slightest sound that might indicate otherness, and then I walked towards the living room door. I took a deep breath and I pressed my ear up against it. Nothing. I knocked 3 times and waited. Then stepping back, I grabbed hold of the radiator with one hand. Bracing myself, I pushed the door lightly with my foot. My heart thundered in my chest as I watched it swing open to reveal my normal, familiar living space. I stood there still holding onto the radiator, craning my neck, trying to peer into the room, thinking of the countless theories I'd managed to find online. Only one seemed to make sense. I had found an obscure article on quantum mechanics. It was the only thing that made any sense of my experience. In the absence of observation, our universe is dead. Did my living room only exist when I, the observer, said, "Yes, you exist"? My mind struggled with the concept for a time and yet held my attention. Nothing exists in the absence of the observer, the theory had gone on to expound. Was that why so many people just disappeared, never to be seen again? Go into the woods and walk off the face of the earth? Turn a corner too quickly? Disappear over the summit of a hill or as in my case, walk into an empty room? Did I, stumble upon an incomplete corner of the universe? My mother didn't know how to explain it. It was something handed down through the family. The reason perhaps forgotten, perhaps never really understood. It was an old wives' tale lost in time. If a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? Perhaps perception does create our reality. My eyes were drawn to the splashes of blue that hadn't been there before. It was undeniable. My fingers traced the delicate feathering on my magnolia walls. It was indistinguishable in texture. I reached out and touched the blue on the cream fabric of my sofa. Delicate yet chaotic, beautiful splashes of vibrant blue, as if an artist had created them. That was all that was left of my scarf. I shuddered. That could have been me. Bits of me splashed across the room, intertwined in the fabrics, the decor. Now I knew why my mother hated us running in the house, around corners. Why we should count to 3 before entering a room and of course the knocking. I had perhaps experienced the most rarest of events. Someone somewhere in my family, maybe hundreds of years ago, had the same experience and had issued the warning, the only way they knew how. The rules were there, a delaying tactic to allow the world time to render, just in case there was a lag.